Incredible raid and quite heroic. So I think for all this time that those hostages have been out of Israel's hands and there's been a lot of depression in the country about being able to rescue them, this is exactly the sort of tonic they needed. Yes, it's only 4 of them, but they were rescued in a very daring operation which saw the IDF and Israeli police descend on this area, which was a civilian area because that's where Hamas are hiding the hostages. They were held in 2 different apartments. Noa Agamani was in one, she's the female hostage, and the others were in another apartment. And they did this impressive raid where they managed to get in, take them out and get them back to Israel safe and sound. So look,
Jonathan, from a military perspective, it was impressive. However, the argument at the moment and the conjecture online is that it came at a cost, a severe cost to Palestinian lives. The Hamas health authorities say that the figure of Palestinian civilians, women and children included, was something like 140. The IDF say it's perhaps under 100. The question remains, from some people, playing devil's advocate, are 4 Israeli lives, the hostages, are they worth 100 Palestinian deaths?
Ben, I can only tell you that if, for some twist of fate, you or I got kidnapped from this country by terrorists, I would hope the British Army and the British forces would do absolutely everything the Israeli forces did to get us back. And I think if it does come at a cost, perhaps that'll be a cost that Hamas and Palestinian terrorists learn, that when you kidnap civilians from their homes and when you take them into hostage imprisonment for over 200 days, you can expect that the Israeli army will do everything it can to get them back. And it's worth pointing out as well that this issue of calling people civilians is tricky here because they were being held apparently in civilian homes. So I would question whether or not most people watching would feel that someone keeping prisoners, civilians stolen from Israeli territory, innocents, keeping them prisoner in their homes under armed guard, whether those really are civilians under the rules of war. And I think that Israel has obviously taken a decision here to rescue those people in a way that will get them out. And it just shows how much Hamas actually blurs the distinction between civilians and combatants, because to put someone in a civilian home, there's now news going out actually around from Gazan sources that one of the people was actually a journalist who was working at times for Al Jazeera, who was
really? I missed that.
So, well, that's out this morning. And the fact of the matter is that then we need to re-question why there's been a high journalist death count in Gaza, because sometimes journalists aren't all nice people. Sometimes they work for Hamas. Sometimes they're keeping prisoners. And the same goes for doctors and teachers. Another hostage who was freed during the exchange much earlier on in the war said that they had been held in the home of a teacher, an UNRWA teacher, a UN school teacher. So these are the very complex issues that Israel's having to deal with when it's conducting this war.
And we're just seeing pictures on the screen now for anyone listening on radio. That's the young girl, Noah. She was kidnapped from the music festival. And that she was being reunited with her mother there, a nice warm embrace.
25 years old, Noa Agamani.
25 years old.
She's a 25-year-old girl. She was imprisoned there for that long. She said when the president of Israel called her up to welcome her home, she said, I haven't heard Hebrew for some time. So it just gives you an idea. Probably not an Arabic speaker, probably been unable to understand very much at all during that entire period.
So look, Jonathan, good news on that front. 4 hostages returned home. How many are remaining, though? It's a large number.
That's right. There are, I think, over 100 hostages still there, and we don't know exactly how many of them are still alive. And I think this is incredibly problematic because really what the world should be calling for is immediate release of these hostages. That's a humanitarian issue. There's literally no defence for those hostages still being in Gaza. Israel is under a lot of scrutiny for how it's conducting this war, but ultimately its aim is to get back those hundreds of people that are still being held in Gaza by Palestinian terrorists.
What does this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu's government? Because he, I guess he'll be taking this as a bit of a win and saying that his plan to resolve this conflict militarily is working. However, I was listening to an IDF spokesman on the radio last night who was saying that actually the biggest hope of getting all these hostages back, the remaining hostages, is through some sort of deal, some ceasefire deal.
Certainly the ceasefire negotiations have been going back and forth, and Joe Biden announcing what he said was an Israeli plan only a few days ago has been met by Israel saying that it wasn't exactly the plan that they had put forward. There is still discussion, and certainly some sort of negotiated deal would be ideal because, you know, this is not an easy thing for them to do. If they only managed to rescue 4 people in this way, you can imagine how complex it would be to try and rescue any greater number.
OK, let me ask you about the situation in the UK, because unbelievably, this Middle East goings-on is now having a drastic effect on everything happening here, especially with our election. We saw in the local elections the so-called Muslim vote having a bit of a detrimental effect on Labour. So Keir Starmer is rumoured next week to be recognising Palestine as a state in the Labour manifesto. I want to know whether this is a deliberate bow down, not only to the Labour left, but to this group, the Muslim vote group, who, of course, made those 18 demands of Labour and Sir Keir Starmer before they'd lend their vote back to the party. Others being redefining the description of Islamophobia, cutting all ties with Israeli-made arms companies or Israeli businesses in the UK, so on and so on. Is this a bow down to not only the left, but the Muslim vote as well?
Certainly Labour has a problem because it relies on votes in some portion of its constituents from people who have extremely negative views of Israel, and therefore it might want to reflect that. And Keir Starmer, as a politician, I think, as a Jewish person, I'm aware that he sat next to Jeremy Corbyn for a very long time campaigning for him to be Prime Minister. So I'm aware that Keir Starmer is somebody that does flip and turn in his policies according to what he thinks is going to be expedient, but that's because he's a politician. In terms of that polling that you mentioned, I think it is quite a depressing showing, but we need to be careful as well because they surveyed 1,000 people. Anything under 2,000 is not necessarily the most rigorous for British population opinion. Yeah. And of those, if you then look at the number of 18 to 24-year-olds that it said over 50% of have this peculiar opinion of Israel, well, how many people in that 1,000 were actually that age group? So it could be skewed. But I'll say this, for those people that don't think Israel should exist, what an extraordinary thing to say. I mean, there are people saying Britain shouldn't exist, France shouldn't exist. Yeah. Israel does exist. Yeah. There's over 6 million Jews there. We've had a period in history when people thought that 6 million Jews shouldn't be around. In fact, this is why the state of Israel is so essential. What happened with those hostages, what happens, generally speaking, about Israel is that it will defend Jews from those enemies who want to kill us.
I saw it yesterday. I was on my way home to the south coast of Victoria, loads of youngsters with all sorts of horrible signs. But, it's a strange situation. The young generation, I mean, they don't even know about D-Day, let alone what's going on in Israel, Palestine. So, Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you very much.